Welcome to this breakout session where we will dive into our brand new asset exposure management solution we're announcing today. I'm Noga Anabi, the product manager for this and our unified vulnerability management solution. Understanding your asset landscape is crucial to any security program. We built our asset exposure management solution to help you in a few key areas. Create a complete and accurate inventory of all of your assets. Identify coverage gaps, such as where EDR should be running but isn't. And mitigate risk, such as adjusting access policy for risky assets and updating your CMDB automatically. So let's dive right in. First, we start by bringing in all of the data that is relevant for building an accurate asset inventory. This could be your security tools like your EDR or your phone scanners. It could be your CMDB, your cloud providers, maybe identity management, anything that could be relevant for this process. If you have any information that could be relevant but is not in a tool somewhere, you can also use our any source in order to upload files or even set regular pulls from a database, a spreadsheet, any piece of data that could be relevant for this practice. Once we've brought in all the data across the different sources, we do the first practice of normalizing the data and mapping it into our data model. This is a list of pre-configured entities and relations that are meaningful in the security space, assets, vulnerabilities, software, etc. And for each of the sources, we'll map the original data here on the left, all the fields coming in from the source, into our pre-populated data model. All of our pre-built connectors come with default mappings, and you can always adjust them and add any field into them. This really speaks to the flexibility of our data fabric. The fact that you could either add a new field-to-field mapping, so I can map hostname to my asset name, or I can go as complex as writing a full Python script to extract a very specific tag from a very specific field that could even be custom from any of the vendors. So once we've brought all the data in, the first product that we get is a deduplicated, clean asset inventory. This means we go through the process of deduplication. If I click on this specific asset, I'll see it was reported by 3 different tools. Deduplication means we've gone through the process of reconciling that this is indeed the same asset based on some shared qualities. This could be pre-configured for sources that we know, but it could also be customized. I could add rules to determine how the deduplication is going to be managed and how different assets are going to be merged into the same one or not if I need to. What I now get is the ability for anyone in my team, my security org, my IT team, anyone can go in here, search for an asset, click on it, and learn all the different qualities about it from the different tools in one place. They don't have to go into multiple different platforms and check this out. This could be really useful and really transformational if you don't have a tool like this that's gathering all the information about your assets today. So our asset exposure management solution offers multiple different analytical views. First, you can answer simple yet expensive questions around your asset inventory. You can report on how many assets you bring in from each of the different sources and really understand your situation with each of the tools. You can also slice and dice it by type, OS, owner, site, country, anything that would be meaningful to the organization, and view some over time trends. You can also answer some questions around coverage and gap. So you can search for something like all the assets that I haven't seen from my EDR tool in the last, let's say, 10 days, and really see all these different assets that answer these criteria. I can also look at the overlap of different tools. So in this case, I'm seeing the overlap between my Tenable, my phone scanner, and my CrowdStrike, my EDR, but it could be any technology. These are just the names that I have popped on here. I can also add in a third vendor, let's say Zscaler. And now I get the full layout of where do I have duplication and coverage, where I may be expecting them, where I may not be expecting, and where do I have assets that are covered uniquely by a specific tool. I can also build my own dashboards. So we have a very extensive analytical layer, which is super useful for the CTEM use case or the continuous exposure management process. You can build your own KPIs and track on them, and you can obviously build your own reports and dashboards. So I'm looking at a dashboard here that it took about 7 minutes to build. It's super quick and easy. I can just click into one of these widgets and edit them. It's all clicks. I don't have to write any queries and use any code. And they're also all interactive. So I can click on this specific piece of the pie, look at all of my Windows assets, and scroll through them and actually see them in context. So now that I have visibility into my full asset inventory, I can start building more and more on this. For example, I can create policies that will alert me on specific assets that are not complying with specific policies that I have. In this instance, our asset exposure management can actually generate exposure findings for you, which we call policy violations. So let's look at this infrastructure for creating policies and investigating policy violations. As with anything in our data fabric, I can create my own policy and use any filters. This could check for any type of policy. So I'm looking for a specific population of assets, and then I'm looking for ones that are not complying with a specific rule. Let's say assets that are not being scanned by a vulnerability scanner, or assets that have an EDR on them, but the version is not up to date. So it could really be anything that you could put into words and say, these are the type of assets that I'm looking for. Once I've built a policy, I can actually report on it, and I get immediate tracking of how am I doing versus my goals in terms of this policy. So I see very clear percentages. I see it in coloring that makes sense to my business targets. And I can also break it down by different breakdowns. So for example, I can take one policy here, I can see my compliance rate with it, and then I can also break it down by a specific team or geo, or maybe just by OS, and see who are the worst offenders. So let's look at two specific use cases for policies and policy violations and see how this goes all the way through remediation and operationalizing of this program. Starting with tool coverage. Let's say I'm trying to figure out where are all of my assets that are not being covered by EDR today. So I built this new policy. I set it so that all the findings that are generated by this policy will get an 8.5 severity. And then I set the policy criteria to look for these specific assets. So first, I go into what is the relevant population of assets that I want to test this for, right? I don't want to test for cloud assets. So in my case, I'm looking for workstations and servers that I have seen in the last 10 days, right? The most relevant ones. And what I'm looking for, what are my offenders? This is the policy scenario, are assets that were not seen by CrowdStrike in the last 10 days, or I actually have a flag on them that says it doesn't have EDR. I can also create some benchmarks to generate this coloring that we just saw in the dashboard. So I really have these benchmarks that tell me, am I doing red, yellow, green? So that it's very easy to track this program and report on my progress. Finally, I can set a trigger for how often I want this to be discovered in my environment. It could be daily, weekly, or any cadence that you choose. And I can configure what my policy violation findings would look like. If I go over to my policy violations view, I now see everything that was surfaced by my policies in their last run. So if I look into my missing CrowdStrikes, I can see this asset, for example. I saw it from 3 different sources. I saw it from Zscaler client connector. It has Tenable on it, my vulnerability scanner, and it's also documented in my CMDB in ServiceNow. I see lots of information here, but I do see that it's not covered by my EDR tool, which is CrowdStrike in this case. So what can I do about it? First, I can give it a status and try and move it through to understand the progress of this task. I can assign it to someone, I can set an SLA. I can really get going with the remediation of this. I can initiate the creation of a ticket in a third-party case management platform, Jira, ServiceNow, whatever you choose. And then have the bidirectional sync to understand, again, the progress of my remediating teams. Another thing that I could do is I can initiate actions. Now, I know this asset is not covered by my EDR tool. I'm waiting for the remediation, could take time. What I could do in the meantime is restrict the user that has access to this asset and limit them to access to specific apps only, or do anything that would mitigate the risk of this asset while it's kind of open and has no EDR tool on it. So in this case, I see my last known user that was reported by ZCC or Zscaler Client Connector. I can limit the access of this user to critical apps by increasing their ZPA risk score straight from this platform. Now, this was one example of things that I could track, like coverage gaps, but I'd like to walk through one more example around CMDB health. So let's take a look at one of the CMDB policies now. We can obviously surface assets that are not being covered by the CMDB at all. But we can also look at assets that are being covered by the CMDB but are missing a critical piece of information. In this case, I'm looking at all the assets that are documented in my CMDB, but their owner information is missing. It's either empty or it's an unknown value. I could also be looking at inaccuracies in this field. So let's say assets that are documented with different owners in my CMDB or across different tools in my security stack. This could indicate that I have an inaccuracy that I need to be fixing. So if I go back to my policy violation view, let's look at the CMDB violations that I have here for missing owners. I'll check out this asset, and then I can quickly navigate and see, okay, this asset actually has no owner in the CMDB. What I can do is two things. First, I can navigate to the asset page, see everything there is to know about it, and I can manually set an owner if I wanted to. Let's say in this case, I'm going to go with the AGME team and apply changes, and this will apply in the background. The second thing that I can do, going back to the policy violation, I can trigger an automatic update to ServiceNow CMDB right from the platform. So now I have a new owner value. I can send that owner value into ServiceNow CMDB. I can do it manually or I can do it automatically, and I am constantly improving my CMDB health. So an accurate asset inventory, identifying coverage gaps, automatically updating your CMDB, and mitigating asset risk. These are the key ways our asset exposure management solution provides a great foundation to your CTEM program. It can be a great feed into our unified vulnerability management solution that Aziz is showing in the other breakout. And both of these solutions can feed into Risk 360 to make your risk quantification more accurate. We're really excited about this latest addition to our exposure management platform, and we love the chance to work with you on building an effective CTEM program. Thank you for your time.